The Woven Strength, Understanding the Architecture of the Mind, the Beauty of Difference, and the Strength of Grace, written by Susanna Sunday. This condensed film is an invitation into a much larger work. Across more than 100 chapters, The Woven Strength brings together motherhood, autism, invisible disability, neuroscience, executive functioning, observation, advocacy, and Christian faith. The book returns again and again to one transforming truth. Behavior is the last thing that happens. Before the visible moment, there may be pain, sensory strain, memory loss, fear, processing delay, cognitive overload, a broken sequence, or a body that has been whispering for hours. This film will travel through the whole book, chapter by chapter. We will then pause over the chapter that offers one of its most useful practical ideas: executive function as the brain's chief executive officer. Finally, we will turn that idea into everyday examples parents, teachers, churches, and caregivers can recognize. This is a literary, educational, and pastoral reflection. It does not diagnose a child or replace individual medical, psychological, educational, legal, or emergency advice. Movement 1. Seeing Beneath Behavior. The opening chapters ask us to stop treating the visible moment as the whole story. Behavior, the body, the environment, and the invisible management systems of the brain begin to form one connected language. Chapter 1. The Questions We Ask. The opening chapter replaces the demand for labels with a more compassionate question. What is the child communicating? Behavior becomes a message to understand, not an enemy to defeat. Chapter 2. Behavior is Communication. Visible behavior is presented as the final alarm in a longer, invisible conversation involving the body, brain, environment, and nervous system. Curiosity must come before correction. Chapter 3. The Body Speaks Before the Child Can. Communication begins in the body long before speech. An unfinished task may reflect a missing neurological step rather than laziness, carelessness, or deliberate disobedience. Chapter 4. The Child Becomes the Teacher. Professionals contribute important knowledge, but the child remains the parent's greatest teacher. Daily observation reveals patterns that reports, appointments, and labels cannot fully capture. Chapter 5. Seeing the Invisible. Executive Functioning in Everyday Life. Executive functioning is the brain's invisible management system. Ordinary activities such as making tea, tidying a room, finding shoes, answering broad questions, and remembering a passport depend on many hidden steps. Chapter 6. The Invisible Wiring. What the brain is doing that nobody can see. Daily independence depends on invisible neurological instructions. When one link in a chain does not activate, effort and intelligence may be present, even though the expected action does not appear. Chapter 7. The Stairs and the Lift. Different brains may reach the same destination by different routes. Support is not cheating, it is the lift that makes access possible when the stairs were never designed for every traveler. Chapter 8. The Body Remembers What the Mind Cannot Explain. A persistent physical symptom can carry information that a child cannot explain. Parents are encouraged to observe the body carefully and seek appropriate professional investigation without dismissing unexplained signals. Chapter 9. The Child is Not Broken. The world is seeing through the wrong lens. Difference is not evidence of brokenness. The chapter challenges the assumption that one way of attending, learning, communicating, or completing a task is the only valid way. Chapter 10. The God Who Looks Beyond Behavior. The spiritual center of the early chapters is God's ability to see beyond appearance into the heart. Parents are invited to look past visible outcomes and recognize invisible effort, intention, and need. Chapter 11. The Heart of the Father. The father knows the whole story before responding to the visible moment. His patience becomes a model for parents learning to distinguish exploration, overload, weakness, and deliberate choice. Chapter 12. The Classroom Called Home. Home becomes a living classroom where parent and child learn one another through ordinary routines. The chapter honors experiential knowledge and the wisdom developed through sustained attention. Movement 2. The parent as observer and learner. These chapters honor the knowledge formed at home, the healing that begins with being understood, and the grace parents need while they learn. Chapter 13. The parent who learns to see. The child is not a project to perfect. The parent's first task is to know the person, notice strengths and interests, and create a home where understanding comes before correction. Chapter 14. The body of Christ sees what the eyes cannot. Creation communicates in many forms, and the church is called to recognize what ordinary sight misses. Spiritual community should make room for bodies and minds that express themselves differently. Chapter 15. The parent's greatest weapon is observation. Observation is presented as a practical form of love. Recording sleep, food, pain, noise, transitions, people, and timing can reveal patterns that make support more precise and humane. Chapter 16. The miracle is not in fixing the child. The hoped-for miracle is reframed. Transformation may appear not as the child becoming typical, but as the family learning to understand, adapt, connect, and love with greater depth. Chapter 17. The garden begins with being understood. To be fully known without shame is described as an echo of Eden. Homes can become safer gardens when children are listened to, guided without humiliation, and protected from impossible expectations. Chapter 18. The girls never leave. The children adults once were remain present within them. Parenting can awaken old fears and unmet needs, making self-compassion and healing essential parts of caring well for a child. Chapter 19. The world keeps asking, what's wrong? God keeps asking, what happened? A deficit question is replaced by a story question. Asking what happened opens space for history, trauma, biology, fatigue, pain, and context, instead of reducing the person to a fault. Chapter 20. When the body is on fire. Behavior may begin in physical discomfort, immune responses, hormones, sleep loss, sensory strain, or nervous system overload. The chapter urges careful medical attention while avoiding unsupported certainty. Chapter 21. The parent is not the child's therapist. The parent is the child's historian. Parents are released from the impossible demand to become every professional. Their distinctive contribution is continuity, remembering patterns, changes, responses, preferences, and the child's unfolding story. Chapter 22. The questions that changed my parenting forever. Better questions produce gentler and more useful responses. The chapter moves from blame and control towards questions about safety, capacity, environment, timing, and unmet need. Chapter 23. The child who cannot tell you their body is hurting. Some children cannot locate, interpret, or report pain in expected ways. Changes in sleep, appetite, movement, behavior, or tolerance may be the body's only available vocabulary. Chapter 24. The parent is not failing. The parent is learning. A difficult day is not proof of parental failure. Parenting a differently wired child involves continual learning, revision, apology, experimentation, and grace rather than instant mastery. Movement 3. Changing the environment and the lens. The book now turns from changing the child towards removing barriers, entering the child's world, and discovering strengths that standard measurements miss. Chapter 25. The child is not living in your world. They are inviting you into theirs. Connection deepens when adults enter the child's interests, rhythms, sensory world, and preferred forms of communication, instead of demanding that the child constantly cross into an adult-designed world. Chapter 26. Before you change the child, change the environment. Lighting, noise, pace, clutter, transitions, language, and social demands can create or remove barriers. Changing the environment may reveal abilities that pressure had hidden. Chapter 27. The day I stopped asking, how do I change my child? The focus shifts from reshaping the child to changing understanding, expectations, and support. Acceptance does not abandon growth. It provides a safer foundation for it. Chapter 28. The invisible disability. Invisible disabilities require effort and courage that outsiders may never recognize. The chapter honors achievements such as entering a noisy room, making a call, or trying again after overload. Chapter 29. Stop asking what the child cannot do. Deficit lists can eclipse the person. The chapter redirects attention towards interests, strengths, effort, emerging capacity, and the conditions under which the child can participate. Chapter 30. Stop measuring fish by their ability to climb trees. Standard systems often reward one narrow profile of attention, speed, memory, communication, and social behavior. A poor fit may expose the measurement, not the intelligence of the child. Chapter 31. Treasure hunting. Parents are invited to search deliberately for gifts hidden beneath fear, labels, and exhaustion. Repeated interests may be clues to design, purpose, joy, and future possibility. Chapter 32. The invisible conversations. Every person carries an outward conversation and an inward one. Behavior, silence, hesitation, and withdrawal may make sense only when the private conversation is treated as real. Chapter 33. The child you are raising is raising you. Parenting becomes mutual formation. The child develops under the parent's care while also teaching the parent patience, humility, attention, courage, and a deeper understanding of grace. Chapter 34. The child who became my greatest professor. Lived relationship becomes a rigorous education. The child teaches lessons about communication, regulation, difference, and love that formal qualifications alone cannot provide. Chapter 35. The child is not giving you a hard time. The child is having a hard time. This linguistic shift moves the child from adversary to person in distress. It changes the parent's first response from punishment or personal offense to support and investigation. Chapter 36. The parent becomes the child's interpreter. Parents often translate between the child's internal world and systems that misread it. Good interpretation protects dignity while helping schools, relatives, clinicians, and churches respond more accurately. Movement 4. Acceptance, advocacy, and community. The private lessons of the home expand into schools, churches, systems, and the wider world. Understanding becomes advocacy, hospitality, and a refusal to define the child by diagnosis. Chapter 37. The Day I Stopped Fighting Autism. Ceasing to fight the child's neurology creates room for relationship, practical support, and peace. Acceptance is framed not as surrender, but as the end of a war against the person. Chapter 38. Stop asking, what's the diagnosis? Start asking, who is the child? Diagnosis can guide access and support, but it cannot contain identity. Understanding begins with the child's personality, preferences, humor, fears, strengths, and relationships. Chapter 39. The world wants explanations. The child needs understanding. Parents are not required to satisfy every outsider's curiosity. The child's safety and dignity matter more than producing explanations for people who have not earned access to private information. Chapter 40. The mother who becomes the expert. A mother's expertise grows through years of close observation and pattern recognition. Professional knowledge should meet, not dismiss, the deep evidence carried by the family. Chapter 41. The brain is not broken. It is wonderfully and differently wired. The language of brokenness is rejected in favor of difference, complexity, and design. Difficulty is acknowledged without making deficiency the child's defining identity. Chapter 42. The church must become the safest place on earth. Faith communities are called to welcome families whose children move, vocalize, regulate, or participate differently. Hospitality must become practical, sensory-aware, non-shaming, and rooted in Christ's welcome. Chapter 43. The child is not the problem. The system is often the problem. Systems designed around one kind of learner can manufacture failure. The chapter asks adults to examine timetables, classrooms, policies, communication methods, and inflexible rules before blaming the child. Chapter 44. The miracle is not that they become like us. The miracle is that we learn to love like Christ. The deepest miracle may be the transformation of the people around the child. Christ-like love makes space, relinquishes pride, listens, protects dignity, and refuses to confuse sameness with wholeness. Chapter 45. We are measuring the wrong miracle. What families measure shapes what they pursue. Progress must include safety, trust, communication, regulation, courage, connection, and recovery, not only compliance, grades, speech, or independence. Chapter 46. What if God entrusted these children to us because they could trust us? The chapter treats parenting as sacred trust rather than proof of superior strength. The calling is to keep learning how to see, protect, and accompany the child faithfully. Chapter 47. The father never panics. God's steadiness offers an alternative to fear-driven parenting. A calm response does not deny difficulty. It creates enough safety to think clearly, seek help, and take the next wise step. Chapter 48. The day I realized God had been parenting me the whole time. While the mother asks God to teach her to parent, she discovers that her own patience, priorities, and trust are being formed. Parenting becomes a place of reciprocal grace. Movement 5. Watching before controlling. Here the author develops a practical discipline of observation, processing time, task support, relationship, and questions that look upstream of crisis. Chapter 49. The healing began the day I started watching instead of controlling. Control forces an expected outcome. Observation seeks understanding. By watching patterns before intervening, the parent becomes more accurate, less reactive, and more available for connection. Chapter 50. Stop asking, what is wrong with my child? Start asking, what is my child trying to tell me? A single question reorganizes the whole relationship. Instead of locating wrongness in the child, the parent searches for the message contained in behavior, physiology, silence, and context. Chapter 51. Before you teach the child, study the child. Effective teaching begins with an individual profile, interests, sensory needs, processing time, preferred communication, regulation, and motivation. Methods must serve the learner rather than the reverse. Chapter 52. The child is not deliberately ignoring you. The brain is still traveling. Delayed response may reflect processing time rather than refusal. Repeating, escalating, or answering for the child can interrupt a brain that is still receiving and organizing the instruction. Chapter 53. They are not being stubborn. They may be stuck. Task initiation, uncertainty, fear, overload, and invisible decision-making can create a neurological handbrake. Pressure magnifies the problem, while co-planning and a clear first step can release movement. Chapter 54. The day I stopped asking, why can't they, and started asking, what happens just before they can't? The chapter looks upstream. By examining what accumulated before a difficult moment, parents can identify cognitive load, sensory strain, fatigue, hunger, masking, transitions, and lost recovery time. Chapter 55. The child who is looking away may be paying more attention than everyone else. Eye contact is not a reliable measure of listening or learning. Looking away may reduce visual load and allow the brain to concentrate more effectively on spoken information. Chapter 56. The brain was designed for relationship before performance. Connection is treated as the brain's first context for growth. Safety, belonging, and responsive relationships support learning more effectively than shame, fear, or performance pressure. Chapter 57. Your child is not late. Your child has their own clock. Developmental timelines can inform support, but should not become a verdict on worth or future. Growth may arrive unevenly, slowly, suddenly, or along a different route. Chapter 58. The child is not failing the test. The test was never designed for the child. A test may privilege speed, handwriting, eye contact, language, memory, or sensory tolerance rather than the knowledge it claims to measure. Access requires separating the skill from the barrier. Chapter 59. They remember how you made them feel. Long after specific instructions fade, the emotional memory of safety or shame may remain. The tone of teaching becomes part of what the child learns about self, relationship, and God. Movement 6. Fighting barriers and celebrating invisible growth. These chapters call families to confront inaccessible systems, enlarge imagination, honor ordinary ministry, and celebrate courage that the world does not measure. Chapter 60. Stop fighting the child. Fight the barrier. The child is repositioned as a partner, not the obstacle. Advocacy should target inaccessible environments, communication gaps, sensory barriers, rigid systems, and missing support. Chapter 61. The greatest disability is often not in the child. It is in our imagination. Limited expectations can become an invisible ceiling. Adults are challenged to imagine participation, contribution, joy, faith, work, and relationship beyond conventional pathways. Chapter 62. Stop preparing the child for the world. Start preparing the world for the child. Responsibility for inclusion cannot rest entirely on the child. Schools, churches, families, workplaces, and public systems must learn to communicate, adapt, and remove preventable barriers. Chapter 63. One day the world will thank these children. Traits once punished may later become sources of innovation, honesty, insight, persistence, or reform. The chapter asks readers to protect difference long enough for its contribution to emerge. Chapter 64. What my child gave me that no university ever could. Academic knowledge is honored, but lived love provides another education. How to notice, wait, interpret, advocate, apologize, adapt, and see the sacredness of an ordinary person. Chapter 65. The Ministry of Ordinary Days. Meaning is not confined to breakthroughs and milestones. Repeated meals, prompts, journeys, laundry appointments, and quiet companionship become a ministry of faithful presence. Chapter 66. Invisible victories deserve visible celebration. Courage often appears in achievements too small for certificates: entering, trying, recovering, tolerating, asking, waiting, or returning. Families are encouraged to name and celebrate the true cost of progress. Chapter 67. Every parent needs someone who believes them. Being doubted intensifies an already demanding journey. Parents need people who take observations seriously, listen without cross-examination, and offer practical, steady companionship. Chapter 68. Stop trying to rescue the child from their story. Love cannot remove every painful chapter, but it can ensure the child is not abandoned within it. Parents are invited to accompany rather than control the entire story. Chapter 69. Stop trying to rescue the child from their story, continued. The continuation emphasizes presence over perfection. The child may not receive an easy life, but can receive the durable knowledge that someone walked beside them without turning away. Chapter 70. The gift hidden inside difference. Difference carries difficulty and may also carry gifts. The chapter invites readers to look for design, perspective, sensitivity, honesty, pattern recognition, creativity, and purpose without romanticizing struggle. Movement 7. Delight Gospel in the Father. Grief is allowed, but it is not the final word. The child becomes a living teacher of delight, grace, belonging, and the character of God. Chapter 71. The Day I Stopped Mourning the Child I Imagined. Parents may grieve expectations without grieving the child. Releasing an imagined future creates room to know, love, and delight in the real person who is already present. Chapter 72. Loving the child God actually sent. Acceptance grows into delight. The child is not merely tolerated as reality. They are enjoyed, cherished, and recognized as a person whose presence brings genuine good. Chapter 73. The Invisible Kingdom. Appointments, reports, and behavior belong to the visible world, while courage, trust, love, patience, and spiritual formation belong to an invisible kingdom that also deserves attention. Chapter 74. What my children taught me about the Father. The greatest lessons extend beyond autism and advocacy into the character of God. The children reveal patience with presence, dependence, honesty, and the Father's way of valuing people. Chapter 75. The Gospel according to an autistic child. The gospel becomes visible through welcome, dependence, grace, truthfulness, and love that does not require performance. The child's life becomes a lived invitation to receive rather than earn belonging. Chapter 76, The Invisible Wiring, a Final Reflection. The first major movement closes by recognizing that the journey has been about more than diagnosis. Learning to see invisible wiring has also exposed the invisible needs of every human heart. Movement 8, The Architecture of Executive Function. The book now moves deliberately into neuroscience, explaining the systems that help a brain begin, remember, switch, stop, regulate, process, and recover. Chapter 77, God Designed the Brain Before We Ever Tried to Understand It. The neuroscience section begins by placing scientific curiosity within wonder. Understanding biology does not reduce personhood or faith. It helps readers appreciate the complexity God already knew. Chapter 78, The Brain is an Orchestra, Not a Collection of Separate Instruments. Brain functions work in networks rather than isolated boxes. Memory, movement, attention, emotion, language, and sensation influence one another, so a difficulty in one system can reshape the whole performance. We now pause for an expanded reading of Chapter 79, Executive Function, the brain's chief executive officer. If I had to choose one concept that transformed my understanding of children more than almost any other, it would be executive functioning. It sounds technical, but it lives in ordinary rooms, ordinary bags, ordinary mornings, and ordinary unfinished tasks. Imagine a large company filled with brilliant people. There are gifted designers, careful accountants, creative engineers, and experienced managers. Now imagine that nobody coordinates the meetings, sets priorities, watches the deadlines, or decides what should happen first. The intelligence is still there. The talent is still there. What is missing is coordination. Executive function is the brain's management team. It helps us decide where to begin, plan a sequence, ignore distractions, change from one activity to another, control impulses, remember instructions long enough to use them, estimate time, finish a task, and adjust when something unexpected happens. These are not simply school skills. They are life skills. This is why intelligence and organization must never be confused. A highly intelligent child can forget their school bag. A creative adult can delay one important email for hours. A gifted musician can struggle with paperwork. A child can understand the lesson and still fail to hand in the completed work. The capacity to know and the capacity to manage what we know are related, but they are not the same. Consider the instruction: clean your room. An adult hears one task. A child may hear 50 invisible decisions. Where do I begin? Do the clothes come first or the books? Where does this object belong? What counts as clean? How long will this take? How will I know when I am finished? The room has not changed size, but the invisible decision-making has become a mountain. The most helpful response is not always to do the task for the child. It is to break the mountain into stones. Begin with the books. Pause. Then place the clothes in the basket. Pause again. Put the rubbish in the bin. Check the floor. The mountain remains real, but it becomes climbable. Starting may be the hardest part. Parents sometimes assume that a child dislikes the work when the real difficulty is crossing the space between intention and action. A train needs enormous energy to move from stillness. Once moving, momentum helps. The child may not need a lecture about motivation. They may need someone to begin beside them. Adults know this experience too. We look at a cupboard that needs organizing and walk away. We place a passport beside the bag and still leave without it. We carry washing to the machine and forget to press start. We open a drawer and in our minds complete the task without physically closing it. These moments should not make us ashamed. They should make us compassionate. Support is not the enemy of independence. A visual schedule, checklist, timer, label, reminder, or calm adult is scaffolding. Builders use scaffolding while a structure is being formed. Nobody calls the building weak because scaffolding helped make it possible. In the same way, parents and teachers can lend organization while the child's own management systems develop. The spiritual invitation is equally gentle. Scripture rarely gives a person every future step at once. Abraham is told to go. Peter is told to follow. We receive daily bread, not a lifetime of bread in one overwhelming delivery. The Father understands that human beings often walk best with today's step. The question that brings freedom is no longer, why won't they? It becomes, which part of this task is difficult to begin, hold, organize, change, stop, or finish? That question moves us away from blame and towards useful support. It allows us to see a capable child whose invisible management system may need another pair of hands for a while. This is not lowering expectations. It is making expectations reachable. It is coaching rather than controlling. It is helping the child experience enough successful steps that little by little the structure becomes stronger and the scaffolding can change. Chapter 80, Working Memory, the Brain's Invisible Notepad. Working memory briefly holds information while it is being used. Multi-step instructions may fade before action, making visual schedules, lists, timers, repetition, and external reminders acts of wisdom. Chapter 81, Cognitive Flexibility, Why Change Can Feel Like an Earthquake. Switching plans requires the brain to release one prediction and build another. A small change can therefore feel physically large, especially when stress, uncertainty, or sensory load is already high. Chapter 82, Inhibitory Control, Why Just Stop is sometimes the hardest instruction of all. Stopping an impulse, movement, word, emotion, or thought is an active neurological task. Support may require replacement actions, environmental changes, practice, and regulation rather than repeated commands. Chapter 83 repeats the previous chapter on inhibitory control in the supplied edition. Its essential reminder remains important. The ability to stop is a developing brain capacity, not a simple test of character. Chapter 84, Emotional Regulation, the Brain's Internal Thermostat. Emotional regulation includes noticing, naming, modulating, expressing, and recovering from emotion. The goal is not the absence of feeling, but a nervous system supported back towards safety. Chapter 85, Sensory Processing, when the world arrives too loud, too bright, or too fast. The same environment can arrive very differently through another nervous system. Sound, light, texture, movement, smell, temperature, and crowding can consume capacity before behavior appears. Chapter 86, Attention, the Brain's Spotlight. Attention is the brain's selection system, not simply stillness or eye contact. A child may attend deeply while moving, looking away, or focusing on details adults have not prioritized. Chapter 87, Processing Speed. Fast thinking is not the same as deep thinking. Silence after a question may reflect processing rather than ignorance. Time pressure can hide deep understanding, while a respectful pause allows thought to become language or action. Chapter 88, The Amygdala, the Brain's Smoke Alarm. The amygdala reacts to possible danger before conscious reasoning catches up. When the alarm is active, behavior may prioritize escape, defense, freezing, or protection rather than learning or compliance. Chapter 89, The Prefrontal Cortex, Where Wisdom Learns to Live. Planning, inhibition, judgment, perspective, and thoughtful choice rely heavily on a developing prefrontal cortex. Children often need to borrow adult calm and structure while these capacities mature. Let us now make executive functioning visible. The following examples gather the daily life language of chapters 5 and 79 and connect it with the detailed neuroscience chapters that follow. Executive Function 1. Task Initiation. Crossing the gap between intending to act and actually beginning. For example, standing in a messy bedroom without knowing what to touch first. For example, wanting to start homework but remaining frozen beside the bag. For example, knowing a message must be sent but delaying because the opening sentence will not come. Helpful scaffolds include: offer one visible first step, begin together for 2 minutes, use a start cue or countdown. Executive Function 2. Planning and sequencing. Working out the order of hidden steps needed to reach an outcome. For example, making tea but forgetting to switch on the kettle. For example, taking washing to the machine without adding detergent or pressing start. For example, beginning a school project without identifying materials, stages, or deadlines. Helpful scaffolds include: break the task into visible steps, use pictures or a checklist, model the sequence aloud. Executive function 3, organization. Grouping materials, information, and actions so they can be found and used. For example, putting papers into a bag but not the correct folder. For example, losing shoes because there is no consistent home for them. For example, knowing every fact for an assignment but being unable to arrange the answer. Helpful scaffolds include: give items fixed homes, use color and labels, reduce the number of categories. Executive function 4. Prioritization. Deciding what matters first when several demands compete. For example, decorating a title page while the main assignment remains unfinished. For example, packing favorite objects before the passport needed for travel. For example, responding to a new toy while the instruction to fetch shoes disappears. Helpful scaffolds include: mark must do and can wait, limit choices, name the next priority explicitly. Executive function 5, working memory. Holding information in mind long enough to use it. For example, reaching the top of the stairs and forgetting why you went there. For example, remembering only the first part of a 5-step instruction. For example, forgetting the question while trying to organize the answer. Helpful scaffolds include: shorten instructions, externalize memory with lists or pictures, ask for recall without shame. Executive function 6, sustained and selective attention. Keeping the brain's spotlight on what matters while filtering competing input. For example, looking away from the teacher to reduce visual load while listening closely. For example, being pulled away from a task by a movement, sound, or favorite object. For example, focusing deeply on one detail while missing the wider instruction. Helpful scaffolds include: reduce competing input, allow movement or looking away, use brief check-ins and clear endpoints. Executive function 7, inhibitory control. Applying the brain's brake to an impulse, action, word, or emotional response. For example, calling out an answer before the question is finished. For example, touching an interesting texture despite knowing the rule. For example, continuing to move or speak after hearing stop. Helpful scaffolds include: teach a replacement action, practice when calm, change the environment instead of relying on willpower alone. Executive function 8, cognitive flexibility. Changing direction when a plan, rule, expectation, or activity changes. For example, becoming overwhelmed when the usual cup is unavailable. For example, struggling to leave a preferred activity even after a warning. For example, knowing one way to solve a problem but being unable to try another. Helpful scaffolds include: preview changes, use a bridge between activities, offer 2 acceptable alternatives. Executive function 9, time awareness, sensing duration. Estimating how long a task will take and acting before time runs out. For example, believing there is plenty of time until departure becomes an emergency. For example, spending most of a lesson preparing and too little completing. For example, finding waiting intolerable because the end cannot be felt. Helpful scaffolds include: use a visual timer, show time in chunks, build in transition and recovery time. Executive function 10, emotional regulation, noticing, modulating, expressing, and recovering from emotional activation. For example, a small correction producing a large response after a demanding day. For example, remaining distressed long after other people believe the event is over. For example, appearing calm until the nervous system suddenly overflows at home. Helpful scaffolds include: co-regulate before directing, reduce shame, plan recovery and calming options together. Executive function 11, processing speed. The time needed to receive, organize, and respond to information. For example, knowing the answer but producing it after the conversation has moved on. For example, needing silence after a question before words become available. For example, completing accurate work slowly and being mistaken for lacking understanding. Helpful scaffolds include pause before repeating, reduce speed pressure, offer written or visual response options. Executive function 12. Self-monitoring and completion. Checking progress, noticing errors, and recognizing when every final step is complete. For example, opening a drawer and mentally experiencing the task as complete before closing it. For example, finishing the homework but leaving it on the table instead of returning it to the bag. For example, submitting work without noticing that one page or question is missing. Helpful scaffolds include use a final check routine. Ask, what is the last step? Photograph or display a finished example. Movement 9. Communication, perception, and the invisible story. Speech, social rules, body signals, prediction, memory, cognitive load, and behavior are placed within a wider picture of how each brain constructs its world. Chapter 90. Language is more than words. Communication includes gesture, movement, expression, silence, pointing, behavior, symbols, and technology, as well as speech. Respect begins by recognizing every reliable way the person communicates. Chapter 91. The social brain. Reading the invisible rules. Social life depends on unwritten expectations about timing, tone, distance, turn-taking, humor, and context. Struggling to infer hidden rules does not mean lacking intelligence or care. Chapter 92. The theory of mind. Discovering that other minds see the world differently. Understanding another person's knowledge, intention, and viewpoint develops gradually and unevenly. Misunderstandings can be reduced by naming perspectives rather than assuming they are obvious. Chapter 93. Interoception, the hidden sense that shapes everyday life. Interoception helps the brain notice internal signals such as hunger, thirst, pain, temperature, heartbeat, toileting needs, and emotional arousal. Weak or intense signals can shape behavior profoundly. Chapter 94. Predictive processing. The brain is constantly guessing the future. Brains use past experience to predict what will happen next. Uncertainty, surprise, and inaccurate predictions consume energy, while routines and clear previews can make the world more manageable. Chapter 95. Cognitive load. When the brain is carrying too much. Every demand occupies limited mental capacity. Language, noise, decisions, memory, social monitoring, and emotion can fill the system until even a small additional task causes collapse. Chapter 96. Memory is not a filing cabinet. Memory is reconstructed through attention, emotion, repetition, meaning, context, and retrieval cues. Forgetting is not always evidence that information never entered or that learning did not occur. Chapter 97. Strengths and weaknesses often grow side by side. Human profiles are uneven. Exceptional ability in one area can coexist with substantial support needs in another, and neither side invalidates the reality of the other. Chapter 98. The myth of normal. There is no single standard brain against which every person can be fairly measured. Human variation is ordinary, while the pursuit of normal can obscure individuality and create shame. Chapter 99. Behavior is the last thing that happens. The book's central message returns with neurological depth. Before behavior, there may be sensory input, prediction, memory, pain, cognitive load, fear, language difficulty, and failed executive coordination. Movement 10. Regulation, family, mystery, and wonder. The final chapters return to relationship. Calm is borrowed, families develop together, growth is measured differently, and knowledge finally bows before mystery and worship. Chapter 100A. Co-regulation. Borrowing another person's calm. Children first learn regulation through safe relationships. Connection, pace, tone, presence, and an adult's steadiness can help a distressed nervous system return to a state where direction becomes possible. Chapter 100B. The family brain. No brain develops in isolation. Every family has a shared nervous system climate. Siblings, marriage, exhaustion, support, conflict, grace, and isolation all affect development, so the whole family deserves care. Chapter 101, Measuring Growth. Looking for the miracles nobody else sees. Growth is broadened beyond conventional milestones. Recovery, self-advocacy, trust, tolerance, communication, flexibility, and one brave attempt may represent profound development. Chapter 102, What Science Still Cannot Explain. Neuroscience offers valuable insight while retaining honest limits. Mystery is not treated as failure, but as an invitation to humility, careful inquiry, and wonder. Chapter 103, Where Neuroscience Ends and the Spirit Begins. Science asks how processes work. Theology asks about meaning, identity, purpose, and love. The chapter brings both into respectful conversation without forcing either to answer the other's question. Chapter 104, Wonderfully Made, A Final Reflection. The final chapter returns from mechanisms to personhood. Every brain remains more than its functions, every child more than a diagnosis, and every life worthy of dignity, wonder, support, and love. The woven strength closes where it began, with the person, not the label. A brain can be studied without reducing the child to biology. A disability can be taken seriously without declaring the person broken. Support can be generous without becoming shame. Faith can make room for science, and science can deepen wonder. The practical invitation is simple. Look beneath behavior. Study the child before teaching the child. Change the environment before blaming the nervous system. Break hidden mountains into visible steps. Lend calm before giving direction. Celebrate invisible victories. Protect dignity. Ask better questions. And when you do not know, remain curious. The father is not frightened by what is unfinished. He sees intention, effort, history, wiring, fear, courage, and every missing step. He sees the whole person. You are not failing because you are still learning. Your child is not a problem to solve. You are learning one another's language, one ordinary day at a time. For the complete journey, read The Woven Strength by Susanna Sunday. Visit mothersfaith.xyz, subscribe to Mother's Faith, and share mercy daily. Copyright 2026, Susanna Sunday Ministries, all rights reserved. Final spoken passage ends, trailing silence, ends.